Caleb Monroe had accepted his fate with quiet resignation. For 12 years, every sunrise was a painful repetition of the one before. Trapped inside the cold, soulless walls of Cell B-17 in Huntsville State Prison, Texas, time didn't move forward. It just pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. They'd sentenced him to death for a murder he swore he didn't commit. But as the years crawled by, the court stopped listening. The lawyers stopped calling. His voice became an echo nobody heard. His hair turned gray, decades too early. His eyes sank deep from sleepless nights. Caleb no longer fought for his life. He just fought for a little peace. In those concrete walls under constant surveillance, he'd learned to let go of everything. Hope, anger, the idea of justice. Everything, except one memory. Honey, she was more than a pet. She was family, his refuge, his comfort in the darkest moments. He'd found her on the street when she was just a scared little ball of wrinkled fur, a French bulldog puppy with bat ears too big for her head and eyes that looked at him like he was her whole world. He'd raised her with tenderness. She was there on his good days. She stayed close when life hurt. And though the world had forgotten him, he never stopped thinking about her. Is she still alive? Does she remember me? Is she waiting somewhere? When the warden approached with the official form asking for his last request before execution, Caleb didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for luxury meals, didn't ask for spiritual counsel, didn't ask for anything extravagant. He looked at the warden with a mix of calm and sadness and said, "I want to see my dog." At first, the prison staff thought it was just the eccentric wish of a broken man, a melancholic, impossible request. But there was something in the way he said it, a sincerity you couldn't fake, an emptiness that couldn't be filled. It made even the guards, hardened by years of routine, look away, uncomfortable with the humanity still surviving in this condemned man. Nobody knew it yet, but that simple request would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Honey had been taken to the county animal shelter the same afternoon they arrested Caleb. She didn't understand anything. That morning, she'd gone out for a walk with her owner, happy as always, her stubby legs trotting beside him, her tail stub wiggling with joy. But then came the patrol cars, men in uniforms, shouting, confusion. Caleb was handcuffed without explanation, right in front of her. When she tried to run to him, an officer grabbed her by the collar and lifted her into a truck. From that moment, her world shattered. At the shelter, she didn't bark, didn't eat, didn't even react to other dogs. For days, she stayed in absolute silence, lying with her head down, as if refusing to exist. The shelter workers thought she wouldn't last long. The kind of sadness she showed wasn't normal. It was the loss of something deep, someone who had been her everything. The tag on her collar read, Honey. Owner, Caleb Monroe. Volunteers tried contacting family or friends. No response. Caleb's case was all over the news back then, and some workers whispered among themselves that nobody would want to adopt a killer's dog. But Honey never lost the habit of walking to the shelter door at the end of each day. She'd sit there, straight, waiting, sometimes for hours, as if she knew that one day her human would come for her. But days passed, then weeks, then years, and then Angela appeared. Angela Martinez had started as a volunteer at the shelter. She had a gift for connecting with difficult animals. She saw Honey in her kennel, so serene and sad at the same time, and felt something immediate. She asked to take her for a walk. At first, the French bulldog showed no interest, but something changed after several visits. When they moved Honey to the rest area for evaluation, Angela sat beside her for hours. She didn't talk, didn't try to pet her without permission, just shared the silence. In that silence, Honey slowly let herself sink onto Angela's lap. It was the beginning of something beautiful. Angela adopted her, at first with the idea that it would be temporary, a way to keep her from being euthanized. But months passed, and she fell deeply in love with the little wrinkled face and loyal eyes. Still, she never stopped noticing that Honey carried a sadness embedded in her soul. She slept near the door, got startled by the sound of sirens. Some nights, she whimpered in her sleep. One night, while petting her, Angela noticed the tag on the collar and decided to search the name out of curiosity. Caleb Monroe. When she typed the full name into Google, she found old articles about the case. A man accused of murder, sentenced to death. One headline caught her attention. Caleb Monroe arrested outside his home. Dog had to be forcibly removed. Angela felt a knot in her throat. Could it be possible? Was this the same man she'd read about in the papers, and the human Honey had never forgotten? Weeks later, she received a phone call that seemed pulled from a dream. It was from the state prison. An officer explained that a death row inmate named Caleb Monroe had requested, as his last wish, to see his dog, and they'd found Honey through the microchip number registered under his name. Angela froze. She didn't know what to say. Should I bring this dog I've learned to love to a reunion with a man about to die? What impact would it have on her? On him? But when she looked at Honey, who was staring at her with those deep eyes that carried years of waiting, she didn't hesitate anymore. She agreed to the day, signed the papers, scheduled the trip. Honey didn't know where she was going, but she seemed restless, as if she sensed something important. In the back seat of the car, she stared out the window without looking away from the road. When they arrived at the prison, the staff greeted them with curious looks. They'd never received a request like this before. Angela held the leash firmly as the guards explained that the meeting would be brief and under strict supervision. But nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared for what would happen when Honey saw Caleb for the first time in over a decade. That moment, which began as an act of compassion, would change the course of their lives and set in motion something far greater than anyone could imagine. Caleb was escorted to the prison's interior courtyard, handcuffs on his wrists, flanked by two guards who kept a firm, watchful pace. His face reflected a strange calm, as if he expected nothing, as if he'd already accepted that this meeting would be just a final echo of the past before the end. He wore a gray uniform. His beard was unkempt. His eyes were hollow from the years. He'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his head what he'd say, how he'd react. But in reality, he didn't know what to feel. His hands trembled without anyone noticing. The courtyard was empty except for a figure at the far end. Angela, with Honey at her side. She held the leash tight while the French bulldog panted nervously, as if sensing something beyond the visible. Then it happened. Honey lifted her head, sniffed the air, and froze for a second. Her eyes locked on Caleb. She didn't hesitate. With a high-pitched whine and unexpected force, she broke free from the leash and ran with all her strength toward him. The guards tensed, ready to react, but the warden raised a hand and signaled them to wait. Caleb fell to his knees on the ground just as she reached him. Honey launched herself at him, crying, whimpering, pushing her wrinkled face against his chest, licking his face, his neck, his handcuffed hands. He broke completely, couldn't hold it in. He buried his face in her golden fawn coat, clinging to her like a part of himself that had died years ago. He cried with deep desperation, wordless, as if all the pain held in for so long was pouring out in that embrace, body against body, soul against soul. The guards watched in silence. Even the toughest ones looked away. Some murmured they'd never seen anything like it. The warden, who'd been in his position for decades, swallowed hard. He'd witnessed many goodbyes, many announced deaths, but never a reunion with this much truth. Honey didn't pull away for a second. She lay down beside him, resting her head on his lap, closing her eyes in peace. It was as if they'd both returned to the only place where they'd ever been happy. The clock marked 10 minutes, the time limit, but nobody said anything when it passed. 15 minutes went by, then 20, and nobody interrupted. The guards knew this moment wouldn't repeat itself. It was an act of humanity beyond regulations. Angela watched from a distance, tears streaming down her cheeks. She understood in that instant that what bound this man to this dog wasn't just memory or habit, it was pure love, the kind that survives imprisonment, abandonment, injustice. It was as if, for a moment, the entire brutal system of punishment had stopped before the simple force of loyalty. Then something else happened. When Honey finally calmed down, she began acting strangely. She stood up and positioned herself between Caleb and one of the guards, the one closest to them. She stayed still, staring at him intently, ears raised, body tense. She growled, first low, then louder. Guard Mendel, one of the most veteran officers, tried to joke, saying maybe she smelled his lunch. But Honey didn't relax. She didn't look away from him, as if her instinct detected something. Angela felt a chill run down her spine. Honey had only reacted like this once in all the years she'd known her. It was in a park when they crossed paths with a man who was later revealed to be an animal abuser. In that moment, without knowing why, Angela understood that this reunion wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something deeper. Something hidden that time, memory, and the loyalty of a French bulldog were about to bring to light. Honey's behavior left everyone baffled. Honey stayed immobile between Caleb and Guard Mendel, muscles tense, gaze fixed, a persistent growl resonating with clear warning. Caleb, who knew his dog's body language perfectly, knew instantly this wasn't fear. It was a signal. Honey was protecting him. Guard Mendel tried to approach, raising his hands in a calming gesture. But Honey backed up and growled louder, showing her teeth. The other officers tensed, and the warden approached cautiously. Angela quickly intervened, calling Honey by name and crouching down to calm her. Honey responded to her voice, but didn't take her eyes off Mendel. Her eyes shone with absolute distrust. Later outside the courtyard, the warden requested a private meeting with Angela. He asked if the dog had ever shown similar behavior before. Angela told him about the park incident years ago with an animal abuser, how Honey had detected him before anyone else. She doesn't react like this without reason, she said firmly. That night, the warden couldn't get Honey's behavior out of his head. Out of curiosity and unease he couldn't explain, he asked for Caleb Monroe's complete case file. Not the summary. Everything. Statements, police records, call recordings, trial transcripts. As he read through the night, something caught his attention. That same Guard Mendel had been the first to arrive at the crime scene and the primary witness who claimed to have seen Caleb leaving the house where the murder occurred. His testimony had tipped the scales of the jury. The next morning, the warden reviewed the reports more carefully. Something didn't add up. The times indicated by Mendel didn't match the phone reports from neighbors. The emergency call had been logged almost 20 minutes before the time Mendel testified. Additionally, a traffic camera, whose footage was never used in the trial, showed Caleb in a different location at the exact moment Mendel said he was leaving the crime scene. Driven by moral duty and disturbing curiosity, the warden contacted a young defense attorney, Thomas Guerrero, who had shown interest in reviewing old cases for judicial errors. He handed him the files with a simple phrase, "Review this with an open mind. Something's not right." Thomas dedicated the entire night to the case. The more he read, the more shocked he became. Mendel's statement was inconsistent. The circumstantial evidence was weak. No DNA, no fingerprints, only the testimony of a single officer in a poorly structured sequence of events. The case against Caleb Monroe stood on a thin, fragile column of paper. Honey, without knowing it, had ignited a spark. A simple growl was triggering a complete review of a case closed for over a decade. While Caleb returned to his cell outside, a silent machinery began to move, driven by the intuition of a French bulldog who never forgot the truth. Thomas felt personally committed. He'd never handled a death penalty case, but something told him this wasn't just a judicial error. It was profound injustice where a man had been buried alive by the system sworn to protect him. He gathered a small team, young lawyers, law students, and investigative journalists. Together, they dove into the documents like solving a crime in real time. The team uncovered chilling details. The supposed fingerprints found at the scene were partial, with no exact match to Caleb. The murder weapon was never recovered. The original coroner's report had been edited and didn't match the signed copy in internal files. Someone had forced the puzzle pieces to fit. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Caleb lived each day as if it were his last. He had no idea what was happening outside, but something had changed in him since he'd seen Honey. He was no longer a man waiting to die. He was a man who'd remembered what it meant to love and be loved. Every night he imagined her smell, the warmth of her body, the sound of her paws. He had no hope of freedom, but he had one last pure image, his dog jumping into his arms. Outside, the story grew like wildfire. The journalist working with Thomas, Valeria Mendoza, contacted one of the original jurors and discovered something shocking. Several jury members had doubts during the trial, but were pressured by the prosecutor and the speed of the process. They wanted to close the case quickly, the man said. They made us feel like if we didn't convict, a killer would go free. That testimony was recorded and presented with the appeal motion, strengthening the request to reopen the case. The court accepted the appeal and set an urgent hearing. Thomas presented all the evidence, the juror's testimony, the time inconsistencies, the ignored traffic video, Gard Mendel's suspicious conduct, and new expert analysis contradicting the original. The state prosecutor tried to oppose, but public pressure was enormous. The media had turned Caleb Monroe's case into a symbol of the system's failures. The story of the wrongfully condemned man whose French bulldog waited 12 years moved millions. During the hearing, Caleb testified publicly for the first time in years. In front of judges, cameras, and his lawyer, he said with a firm but broken voice, "They took my life, but they could never take my memory of her. Honey doesn't know about laws, but she knows the truth. She waited all this time because in her heart, she knew I wasn't guilty. And if anyone still doubts, look into her eyes because she's never been wrong about me." The silence was total. Days later, the judge ruled in favor of reopening the trial. He suspended the death sentence indefinitely and ordered an investigation into Gard Mendel's actions. Mendel was placed on mandatory leave and charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. Caleb Monroe didn't walk free that day, but for the first time in 12 years, he felt time moving again. Outside, Angela hugged Honey and whispered, "You did it. You did it." Thomas dove fully into preparing a complete defense, no longer an appeal, but a battle for Caleb's definitive exoneration. The team finally gained access to internal files previously sealed by the prosecution. In them appeared a discarded ballistics report confirming that the weapon type didn't match any object related to Caleb. But even more shocking was an audio recording of an anonymous call made after the crime, where a male voice said, "I know the man they arrested isn't the real culprit." That call was never investigated. Thomas sent the audio to a forensic lab. The voice partially matched Gard Mendel's. The finding was devastating. An ex-convict who had shared a cell years ago with an acquaintance of Mendel showed up at Thomas's office with a confession. He'd heard that man brag about helping a friend in the police fix a big problem by planting evidence against an innocent man. Although indirect, it was enough to reopen the criminal investigation against those originally responsible. The state prosecutor, under public pressure, issued a formal apology for the negligence in the initial investigation. When the judge pronounced the order annulling the sentence, time stopped for everyone present. It wasn't just about freeing a wrongfully condemned man. It was about clearing a name stained for 12 years by a system more concerned with closing cases than delivering justice. Caleb Monroe, shoulders trembling, couldn't believe what he'd just heard. But now all that was behind him, not by luck, but by the stubborn loyalty of a French bulldog who refused to forget him. Outside, when Caleb walked through the courthouse doors and saw Honey, the whole world witnessed a scene that didn't seem of this world. She ran as if every second without him had been a countdown. She jumped with force, crashed into his chest, and whimpered between licks. He collapsed to his knees, hugging her as if trying to recover all the years stolen from them. Beyond the media noise, it was an explosion of love nobody on that street would ever forget. In that embrace, there was no rage or resentment, only forgiveness, relief, and the deep recognition that they'd survived thanks to what they felt for each other. The following days were filled with requests, interviews, tributes. But Caleb turned almost everything down. He only accepted one offer, a small house in the countryside, fully furnished thanks to anonymous donations. It was there that he settled with Honey, far from the noise, close to peace. For the first time in over a decade, he slept with an open window. No bars, no lights on 24 hours. He woke to the sound of wind, not metallic cell doors. Honey slept at the foot of his bed, calm, with an expression that said, "We're home now." Every afternoon, Caleb sat on the porch with a notebook. He'd started writing a book, not as a complaint, but as a testimony of love. He titled it The Dog Who Saved Me. In it, he recounted how he'd met Honey, their life before the arrest, every night in prison with the memory of her gaze, and how that reunion had given him back something he thought was lost forever: hope. He wrote not for the world, but for her, as a way to thank her, to immortalize her. He said that if he ever died, he wanted everyone to know that it wasn't a legal appeal or brilliant lawyer that saved him. It was a faithful heart that waited without conditions, without questions, without forgetting who he truly was. Honey's final years were lived as a gift. They walked together, slept together, ate together, and when she began to weaken, Caleb didn't leave her side for a second. One afternoon, feeling her breathing with difficulty, he held her in his arms, whispered "thank you" in her ear, and stayed with her until her heart stopped beating. He cried yes like never before. But it wasn't a sad goodbye. It was the perfect closing of a story in which, even though the world failed him, the love of a French bulldog was enough to redeem everything. Because Honey didn't just wait for him, she saved him, held him, and brought him back to where he always should have been: free, loved, human.